Hey crafty friends, welcome back. With Halloween and Thanksgiving just around the corner, I thought it would be fun to do a little pivot with our sew along today, and instead of sewing felt plushies, we are going to sew some felt pumpkins. These are so cute for decor, for holiday crafting. I just think for fun. I did some pattern variation so you can make a whole pumpkin patch, and these are easy, beginner friendly, and fun. So as always, I have a free pattern linked in the description below. Go ahead, click that link, print your pattern, gather your supplies, come back here and let's sew these together. To sew these cute fall pumpkins, you're going to need the following supplies: some felt in the colors that you want your pumpkins. One of these free patterns are linked in the description below. You can choose if you want one that looks more like this, you're going to want to use this pattern. I did do my stem extra long in this, so this stem here is not going to be as long as the one here. It's more like this one. And then this pattern, if you want this tall one, I think they work really cute and look great together. Something to trace your pattern with, something to cut your pattern out with, something to sew around your pattern. I have embroidery floss that matches both the green and the orange. You don't have to use embroidery floss. You can also use thread, which will be just thinner and show up not quite as clearly as stitching in these, but I liked the way it showed up, so you can make your choice with that. And then something to stuff your pumpkin with. This is polyfill. It's what's in most stuffed animals, can be found at the craft store. I also use felt scraps, and I have occasionally used plastic bags. So feel free to use the things around you. You don't need special supplies for this. Go ahead, pause the video, print your pattern, cut it out, come back here, and let's make this together. Now, as you're getting ready to trace your pattern, you're just going to put as close to the edge of your felt as you can. This is just going to maximize your felt for future projects. Then just trace around it. As you're cutting it out, you're just going to want to cut inside your tracing lines or try and cut them off a little bit. This will just make sure that they don't show up in our final project. They probably won't anyway because we're going to be sewing the trace lines on the inside, but this just makes extra sure. So once you're finished tracing, go ahead, pause the video and get your pieces cut out. And then any of these felt scraps, these bits that come off as you're cutting, I just hang on to because they're great for stuffing inside your final project as a way to reuse them and save on stuffing. So any of these like bits and bobs that I'm cutting off, I'm going to hang on to. Once you have all of your pieces cut out, it's time to start sewing. So for this thread, I've threaded it with the same that matches my orange, and I usually measure the string from about my fingertips to my shoulder, and we're going to tie a loop knot in one end. So to do that, we're just going to make a circle and put one end under. There's going to be a loop knot. I usually pinch where all the lines are crossed and pull on the needle side of it so that that knot slips down right at the end where my fingers are. It just kind of controls how much string you have. And then we're going to take our pumpkin piece, and we're going to figure out what leaf or what side we want to start on. We're just going to bend the two sides together, and we're going to do a little knot stitch right here in the bottom. So I'm going to go in and out with my needle, pull it almost to the end, and then I'm going to poke the needle back through this bundle of threads right here by the knot and just pull it tight. It's going to give me a knot stitch right here, and I want my seams to show up on this pumpkin. If you don't, you can sew this the opposite way and we can flip it at the end. So if you don't want your seams to show, sew your pieces together where your tracing lines are. If you do want your seams to show, I'm going to do mine so my seams show. I'm going to do it the opposite way. And we are just going to do a blanket stitch. So right after my knot stitch, I'm going to poke my needle back through one of these starter holes, just so my needle is starting on the front side of this fabric. And then we are going to do what's called a blanket stitch. So I'm just going to fold these two kind of petals together. I'm going to put my needle through both pieces of felt, and then I'm going to grab this tail end and I'm going to put it over the top of my needle and then pull it all the way through. Then I'm going to go down a little bit, put my needle through both pieces of felt, leave my needle halfway in, take this tail end, go over the top of my needle and pull it through. If your line gets stuck somewhere in this, pause and usually pull the backward side of it and just loosen that up. And if you don't want your seams to show, you're going to do this just on the opposite side. So you'll have your kind of your lined side is where you're going to be doing this blanket stitch. And then you'll flip your whole pumpkin outwards kind of at the end right before you stuff it. So go ahead, pause the video, get your supplies ready, and start doing this blanket stitch up and down the petals of your pumpkin. All right, and I'm going to pause right here, not quite at the top, because we're going to need an opening place to stuff our pumpkin when we're done. But I'm going to take my needle, I'm going to push it into the pumpkin. So I've got it inside here, and I'm going to come out just across the way on the opposite side of that first petal. And now I'm going to line up the next one, and I'm going to go in and out with that blanket stitch, this time from the top down. come out on that one side. I'm going over here. And it's all right if it's a little bit messy at the top, because when we finish, we're going to put this over the top of our pumpkin, and it's going to hide any of our stitching at the top. Now I'm just going to continue with that blanket stitch through both pieces of felt, pulling it tight all the way down this petal. I'm going to repeat that for the whole pumpkin. You're just going to want to make sure that there's a little bit of a gap at the top, that you're not sewing all the way up to the top of those petals, or else we're going to have a really hard time stuffing this. When you get to the bottom of the petals, you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to poke your needle into the middle of your pumpkin, so you can open that stitch up a little. We're going to poke it in this side so we can come out on this side. Pulling that through, and then we're just going to line up these two petals and continue with that blanket stitch. And we're going to just go from the top over and down, from the bottom over and up for the whole pumpkin. As you're sewing, if your thread runs out, we're just going to do a knot stitch and then add more. So for that, I'm putting my needle halfway through, just like the blanket stitch. And instead of wrapping the thread once over the top, I'm going to do it 2 times. My thread is really low. I probably should have done this earlier. Okay, we're going to do once, twice. Oh, let's see if I can reach it. All right, and then I'm going to pinch it in place and just pull the needle all the way out. I'm going to make a knot stitch right at the top. There we go. We'll snip off the excess, and then just like we did our knot stitch when we started over here, I'm going to do another knot stitch on the top between these two before I start sewing down. So once we get to the very bottom, we're going to do another little knot stitch here. So I'm pushing my needle in halfway. I'm going to wrap the thread once, twice, over the top of the needle, and then I'm pulling it down towards my thumb just to hold it in place. And I'm going to pinch it lightly. That's just going to hold all those strands right there. As I pull my needle through, I'm just still holding that pinch. It's just going to make my knot right here at the bottom. You can also do this knot inside your pumpkin if you want to flip it the other way. And then I am going to poke this needle inside, pull that thread through before I snip it. All right, so now we have our pumpkin. So before we stuff our pumpkin, we're going to do one more thing, and we are going to add a strand to this bottom of this pumpkin so we can decide what shape our finished pumpkin is. So you might want like a squattier pumpkin, you might want a rounder pumpkin. This is going to give you the control to do that. So I am just going to push my pumpkin kind of flat on the bottom so that I can reach right here. This is going to be the bottom of my pumpkin. I'm going to take my needle, and I have a loop knot tied with 2 strands in this one. So I just lined them up together, did that same loop knot with 2 strands. I'm going to go in and out down here and put this through the middle of that. So now I just have an anchor stitch at the bottom. It's going to let me pull this up and decide how fluffy I want my pumpkin. All right, so now that I have this anchor added, I am going to start adding my felt scraps. And as you do this, you really want to keep this string in the middle of your pumpkin. So put your felt scraps in around it. So I'm going to do my felt scraps, and then I'm going to do my polyfill, and I'm just going to be mindful of where this string is, so I'm not just like smooshing it down, it doesn't end up on the sides. I do little bits on the sides all around it while keeping that string right in the middle of my pumpkin. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just pull that up, and I'm going to stick it through. So now we want to take our needle, and we're going to go through the top part of each of these petals to pull them in before we sew the top on. I'm just going to do a loose stitch for them first, and then I'm going to pull it tight, both to pull the petals together and to pull that bottom up. And I'm going to go back through my starting one more time. Now you're going to be strong, and you're just going to pull it all together. And the tighter you pull it, the more this bottom part of your pumpkin is going to come up. You'll get it dimpled in at the bottom, and you'll get this pumpkin-y shape on the top. Your petals should all be kind of closed, and we're just going to do another knot stitch. We're going to go through the middle of 1 or 2 of these pieces. We're going to get this and go once, twice over. We're going to put our thumb on it to hold that knot in place as we pull it out. And it's all right if the string shows, because we're going to sew that green over the top. All right, so now we have our pumpkin shape. Now we're going to sew the stem of our pumpkin. So I am taking a strand of green that matches my felt. I've done a single loop knot in the end. And we are going to start with this rectangle bit. We're just going to fold it over. You can again decide if you want a visible stitch or a hidden stitch. I'm just going to go in the corner, pull my thread almost to the end, Stick my needle through this bundle of threads pretty close to the knot and then pull it tight. And then I am going to do a blanket stitch up the side. So I'm going through both sides, pulling that tail end over and then pulling it through. Once we get to the very top, it's time to grab our circle. If you have any tracing lines, just make sure that they're pointed inward. I'm going to open up this tube that I just made, put my needle in. I'm going to start sewing this circle on, just trying to get the edge of the circle and my rectangle. This is going to take some patience and creativity as you're trying to get just the edges of both. If you need to keep something in the middle of this to try and keep it rounded, that might also help. So I'm just going to stick a marker in here. Okay, so here's my final stitch at the top, and I'm just going to take my needle and I'm going to poke it through the bottom because we're also going to sew it to this top part of our pumpkin before we attach it on here. We're going to be ready to sew that on top of this. First, I'm going to take a little bit of my polyfill and I'm going to stuff that stem. All right, once we've got it stuffed, we're going to go to our star-shaped piece. We're just going to put it in the middle. And then we are going to start the same blanket stitch around it to attach this stem. So I'm going, okay, so again, you might want to bend your fabric down and around. We are going, you can also do it this way, where you just poke it through and then back up and into that loop before pulling it. You can go through both pieces straight down and then don't pull it all the way tight. Back up and through this loop right here. That's going to give you that same blanket stitch look. I am going to do just a curved stitch for mine. So I'm going to do kind of into this. I'm grabbing the bottom and I'm bending it, which I think is just a little faster. I'm pulling that tail over and then pulling it tight. You're going to continue this around the full stump, and this is probably the trickiest piece of this project. You are almost done with the hard part. This stump is a tricky task. And then like before, I'm going to grab this tail end. I'm going to go once, twice over the top of my needle, pinch it with my finger, pull it through. All right, now we have our little stem cap top area ready. So I'm going to start just by using the thread I already have on this. But we are going to sew the top of this onto the top of our pumpkin. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to pull it, and I'm going to do a blanket stitch on mine. So I'm going to go over the top. Just kind of pulling it to the side, going from the green stuff into the orange, pulling that loop over the top. You're going to do this around all the star stem bits. You need to add more string, knot it off, and add more string. Once you finish sewing all the way around the top of this star, we are going to again do that knot where we put our needle halfway through and we wrap this once, twice over the top and we pinch it in place. And now if you want to add a leaf to your pumpkin, this is a great time to do it. So that's just been knotted and I'm going to just put the needle through the top of my leaf, pull it down tight into my pumpkin. And I'm just going to poke my needle through the stem. So now I've got my leaf on there. You can add another leaf if you like. And then I'm going to tie one more knot over here, just knotting that leaf that I just added kind of across the way. Then we're going to trim off our string. And there we have it, our cute little pumpkin. And we are back with our finished felt pumpkins. I had a great time putting these together. I hope that you did too. I want to build a whole display for my mantle. If you enjoyed this or you're interested in more fun and free patterns or sew-alongs, be sure to come back next Monday. I have free patterns posted every week. And if you want to support this channel, be sure to like, share, subscribe, follow along, any of the things, all the things, and I will see you next Monday.